the last passenger of Platform 9. The disturbance began with a bell rung too violently for good breeding. Its jangling note cut across the velvet murmur of the first-class waiting room and sent every head toward the door at once. A porter, carrying a black morocco valise, had scarcely crossed the threshold before Mrs. Evelyn Broadhurst rose from her chair so abruptly that the silver clasp of her handbag struck the arm of the seat with a sharp little crack. "But where is my husband?" she said. The porter, Hobbs, checked himself. He was a stout man with the respectful obstinacy of the railway servant who has seen every variety of human impatience, and is impressed by none of it for more than 3 seconds. "Mr. Broadhurst told me to take the bag straight to the saloon compartment, madam. I understood as how he followed." "You understood wrongly." Her tone was soft, even musical, yet it had in it something at once too smooth and too hard. Miss Isabel Broadhurst, who had been standing near the fire, put down the magazine she had not appeared to be reading. Captain Hugh Anstruther stepped half a pace forward. Miss Clara Dean, Mr. Broadhurst's secretary, looked from one face to another with that air of instant practical attention by which capable women make emotional people seem wasteful. Mr. Julian Fisk removed his spectacles and polished them, though they were not dim. Only Hercule Poirot, seated somewhat apart with his neat travelling rug folded squarely over his knees, did not move at once. His eyes, however, missed nothing, not Mrs. Broadhurst's gloved hand tightening upon the clasp, not Isabel's sudden paling, not the curious downward glance of Clara Dean toward the valise, as if she expected the luggage to answer for its absent master. The train for Elmridge was not yet due to start. Beyond the curtained glass doors, Platform 9 shone long and cold beneath electric lamps. A whistle sounded at a distance. Somewhere a trolley rattled over a joint in the boards. "Perhaps," said Fisk with an effort at pleasantness, "Broadhurst has been detained by one of those infernal directors. He delights in keeping everybody waiting, including his own family." "He does not delight in missing his own train," said Isabel. She spoke quietly, but with the kind of quiet that is more revealing than tears. Poirot observed that she did not say father. Captain Anstruther turned toward the porter. "You saw him last where?" "In the bookstall passage, sir. He had the telegram case in his hand. He says to me, 'Put the valise in my compartment. I come immediately.' That is what he says." "And he did not?" "No, sir." Mrs. Broadhurst moved first. "Then there is no sense in standing here. Hugh, open the compartment." They went out together, not with the dramatic rush of people in melodrama, but with the peculiar haste of civilized persons who remain determined, even in alarm, to preserve the forms of restraint. Poirot rose and followed. Nobody thought to exclude him. In moments of dislocation, order instinctively seeks the nearest mind that appears already composed. The saloon compartment reserved for Mr. Broadhurst stood 3 coaches down, its brass fittings glimmering under the lamps. The blinds were half lowered. Captain Anstruther opened the door, then stopped so suddenly that Isabel, close behind him, gave a small involuntary cry. She pushed past him, saw within, and the cry became a thin, shocked scream that seemed at once too weak and too piercing for the width of the station. Adrian Broadhurst sat in the corner seat as though he had arranged himself there for a disagreeable interview. His head had fallen a little to one side. One hand still rested near the traveling rug on his knees. The other hung downward, the fingers grazing the carpet. There was on his face not violence but astonishment, and in that astonishment a final offense, as if he had found the universe guilty of a breach in etiquette. The station inspector came running. Questions rose, were checked, rose again. A doctor was called from the refreshment room. Poirot stood just outside the door and watched the group as much as the dead man. Captain Anstruther went very white, then unusually steady. Isabel did not weep. She stared at her father with a fixed and unbelieving attention, like someone waiting for a rebuke. Clara Dean pressed both hands together until the knuckles shone. Mrs. Broadhurst, astonishingly composed, asked for smelling salts only after everyone had noticed she had not fainted. The doctor came, bent, touched, straightened. His glance toward the inspector was enough. "He is dead. Quite dead. This is a matter for the police." There was a brief silence in which the platform noises became grotesquely distinct. A porter coughed. Steam drifted past the windows. An elderly woman in another carriage was heard laughing at some private absurdity. Life, in the presence of death, seldom acquires dignity. It becomes merely indecently exact. Inspector Mallory of the station staff began to speak of clearing the platform, of notifying Scotland Yard, of detaining the party. Then Mr. Fisk, who had been looking about him in a distracted, hunted manner, caught sight of Poirot. "Good God!" he said. "Poirot! You are Monsieur Poirot, are you not?" Poirot inclined his head. "I have that honor." "Then for heaven's sake remain. Broadhurst knew you by reputation. We all do. Until the police arrive, this may be some hideous mistake, some attack." "It is not a mistake," said Poirot gently. "But yes, I remain." Captain Anstruther turned sharply. "I was with Broadhurst not 10 minutes ago." All eyes moved to him. "You were with him?" asked Mallory. "Yes. He sent for me from the waiting room. We spoke here." "Alone?" "Yes." "About what?" Anstruther's jaw tightened. "A private family matter." "Which now becomes a police matter," said Poirot. Anstruther's eyes met his. Something proud and troubled moved there. "He wished me to withdraw from my engagement to Miss Broadhurst." Isabel turned to him with a quick, almost angry look. "Hugh! It is true." "And when you left him?" Poirot asked. "He was alive." That was the sentence which altered the atmosphere. Before it, there had been shock. After it, there was suspicion. It entered the compartment as cold air enters when a door is opened on a winter night, invisibly, and at once everywhere. Inspector Mallory cleared his throat. "No one leaves the platform." He posted a guard at either end. A ticket collector was summoned to state who had entered the carriage. A clerk hurried off for the police telephone. Mrs. Broadhurst sat down on the bench outside the saloon, and folded her hands in her lap with elaborate calm. Yet her foot, beneath the dark hem of her traveling coat, moved once, quickly, as if striking at some unseen thing. Halfway along the compartment, on the opposite seat beneath the rack, the black morocco valise had been set in place by the porter. Its cream luggage label, tied with green string through the handle, hung a little askew, so that the name A. Broadhurst slanted against the dark leather with a minute but somehow irritating want of balance. Poirot's gaze rested on it no more than a second, then he turned to the ticket collector, who had come up breathless and confused. "I clipped Captain Anstruther's ticket when he left the compartment," the man said. "And Mrs. Broadhurst earlier, when she came aboard to see if the rug and papers was right for Mr. Broadhurst. But Mr. Broadhurst himself, no, sir. Not yet. I had not clipped his. Mrs. Broadhurst lifted her head. I merely stepped in for a moment before we all settled ourselves in the waiting room. Surely that is of no importance. No detail is without importance, said Poirot. Far down the platform, a policeman in plain clothes was already approaching at speed. With him came the slow collapse of comfort, privacy, and pretense. What had been a family journey was now an enclosed world. Within it there moved a dead man, a set of frightened faces, and one small imperfection in the neat arrangement of things. Section 1 has ended. The plainclothes man crossed the last yards of platform with an economy of motion that distinguished the professional policeman from the alarmed amateur. He showed his card to Mallory, bent over the dead man for less than a minute, and then looked round upon the detained party with a face so ordinary that it became at once formidable. "Reeves, Criminal Investigation Department," he said. "Until Scotland Yard sends further instructions, I take charge here. Nobody is to leave. Monsieur Poirot, I understand you were present from the first?" Poirot bowed. "I saw the little drama begin, yes." "Then perhaps you'll be good enough to remain." "That also is my intention." Reeves accepted the answer without irritation. He had the practical intelligence of a man who knew when vanity was wasteful. He drew Mallory aside, gave 2 quick orders, and then came back to Captain Anstruther. "You say you were the last person to see Mr. Broadhurst alive?" "If no one entered after me, yes." That conditional phrase settled itself in the minds of everybody present. Mrs. Broadhurst's lashes lifted almost imperceptibly. Clara Dean looked down. Isabel said, in a voice that was steady only because it had turned cold with effort, "Someone must have entered after him. You did not kill my father." "No one has used that word yet," said Reeves. "No," said Isabel. "But everyone has thought it." Captain Anstruther made a movement of protest. It was not for himself. Poirot, watching him, saw the thing that men of his type are so reluctant to betray, not fear of accusation, but fear that the woman beside them may be humiliated by it. Reeves asked him for the substance of the interview. Anstruther gave it without ornament. Broadhurst had objected to the engagement. He considered Anstruther poor, impulsive, and not good enough. He had used the phrase, "deeply unsuitable." Anstruther had answered that Miss Broadhurst was of age. Broadhurst had replied that his daughter's allowance was not. There had been anger, but not violence. He had left the compartment, and returned toward the waiting room. He had passed nobody upon the platform except a porter with a rug and a woman from the refreshment room carrying a tray. "Did Mr. Broadhurst remain seated as you left?" Poirot asked. "Yes." "By the window." "Doing what?" "He had opened the valise and was taking out some papers." Clara Dean lifted her head quickly. "What papers?" "I did not ask." "That is odd," said Reeves. "Not odd at all," said Poirot softly. "To an English gentleman, the private papers of another English gentleman are like the underclothing. One does not discuss them." A shadow that might have been amusement touched Reeves's mouth and was gone. He turned to the compartment itself. There was very little to be seen by the untutored eye. The traveling rug lay over the dead man's knees. The silver cigarette case on the ledge was shut. The reading lamp had been switched on, though the platform outside was bright. On the floor, near the farther door, one corner of the mat had folded over upon itself, as though it had been caught by a shoe and imperfectly smoothed down again. Poirot crouched and looked at it. He did not touch. Mrs. Broadhurst spoke from the bench outside. "Is this necessary? Must the whole platform see us exhibited like criminals? It is usually the innocent who find that unbearable," said Reeves. "And the guilty?" "The guilty are sometimes too occupied to mind." Her smile had in it neither mirth nor offense. "How very consoling!" The remark was light, but something under it shifted, and Poirot noticed that Isabel turned her face away. Between the wife and the dead man's daughter there existed that curious modern intimacy which can flourish in a house without ever becoming entirely trust. Each knew something about the other, either knew enough. Reeves sent for the porter Hobbs and the ticket collector together, and took their statements once more in the presence of all. Hobbs had carried the valise to the saloon, and set it under the rack. He had seen Mrs. Broadhurst enter earlier, for half a minute, no more, and later Captain Anstruther go in and come out after. A warmish talk. As for anyone else, he hesitated. "Yes?" said Reeves. "There was a lady in a pale traveling coat moving behind the luggage trolley just after the captain came away. I could not swear to her, sir. I was shifting mailbags." Isabel looked down at her own coat. It was pale gray. "So there was," said Mrs. Broadhurst immediately. "My stepdaughter had gone toward the bookstall." "I had not," said Isabel. The denial came too fast. It startled even herself. Color rose in her cheeks. She hated explaining. "I went only as far as the door of the waiting room." Clara Dean interposed with quiet precision. "Miss Broadhurst remained with me for several minutes. Mr. Fisk can confirm it." Fisk started, as if recalled from a private misery. "Yes. Certainly. She did." It was a small service, given without emphasis, but Poirot saw Isabel's fingers close once upon the back of the bench in gratitude. Clara Dean, with her plain face and faultless collar, seemed at first glance a woman from whom sentiment had been long ago omitted. It was not so. The capacity to serve is often only tenderness that has learned economy. Inside the compartment, beneath the rack, the black morocco valise remained where Hobbs had placed it, and the label still hung just too much to the left, like a picture in an orderly room that someone sensitive must either straighten or go mad beneath. Reeves now examined Mrs. Broadhurst's ticket. "You say you merely entered to see that the things were properly arranged?" "Yes." "Why?" "My husband disliked disorder." Poirot glanced at her hands. The gloves were pearl-gray, immaculately fitted. A woman so exact, he reflected, does not use a general phrase like things when she is speaking truth. She names them. "What precisely did you arrange, madam?" he asked. She turned to him, and for the first time a slight delay occurred before she answered. "The rug? His dispatch case. I do not now remember." "Yet a moment ago you remembered sufficiently to think the matter trivial." A pulse flickered at her throat. "Must one be cross-examined because one was considerate?" "No," said Poirot. "Only because one was there." The words went through the little group with disproportionate force. Reeves, who had begun by regarding Poirot as a useful witness, now regarded him as an ally whose methods were irksome but efficient. He ordered the carriage sealed and the party removed to the private waiting room until Scotland Yard should decide what was to be done next. As they turned back together, the dead man was left behind for the first time. It altered every relationship among them. Grief had no longer an object, it had become position. Suspicion walked beside them, choosing and rejecting, touching now one shoulder and now another. And upon the platform, visible through the glass as they re-entered the room, a train began slowly to draw out, carrying other people into ordinary misfortune. Section 2 has ended. The tail lamps of the departing train slipped past the window and were gone, leaving the glass to reflect the private waiting room and its unwilling occupants with a clarity almost indecent. Reeves closed the door upon them and took up his position by the mantelpiece, as if he were host to a singularly unsuccessful evening. "No one touches anything," he said. "No one communicates with anyone outside this room unless through me. Mr. Fisk, make a list of the party. Names first." There are moments in English life when the making of a list exerts a nearly sacramental effect. Pens, paper, surnames, initials, these small administrative gestures come between the mind and panic. Fisk seized upon them with relief. Clara Dean produced a pencil before he had even asked. Mrs. Broadhurst removed one glove finger by finger, as though she consented to circumstance but not to haste. Isabel remained standing by the fire. Captain Anstruther placed himself a little apart from her, not coldly, but with the instinctive decency of a man who will not increase embarrassment by visible devotion under observation. Poirot, whose courtesy was never an obstacle to perception, let the little machinery establish itself before he spoke. "Miss Dean," he said, "Captain Anstruther mentioned papers in the valise. What papers would Mr. Broadhurst be likely to consult upon a journey?" Clara looked up. "He carried several sets habitually. Company memoranda, legal drafts, correspondence to be signed. He also kept a private packet in a blue envelope." Mrs. Broadhurst's head turned, not much, but too quickly. "A blue envelope?" said Reeves. "Yes. Tied with white tape." "What was in it?" "I do not know." "No?" "No. Mr. Broadhurst did not allow me to handle it." There was truth in the answer, but not completeness. Poirot saw it in the tiny strengthening of the mouth. Clara Dean could refuse quite beautifully. All the firmness of her lay in omissions. Fisk laid down the list. "This can scarcely matter. Surely the essential question is who had cause." "Cause is always abundant," said Poirot. "Opportunity is economical. We shall therefore begin with opportunity." He asked, with the gentleness of one taking conversational interest, where each person had been in the minutes before the body was found. The answers arranged themselves upon the air. Mrs. Broadhurst had been by the fire, then speaking to Fisk. Isabel had stood near the magazine table. Clara had gone to summon tea and returned. Fisk had been searching for a railway timetable in his pocket case. Captain Anstruther had left Broadhurst alive in the carriage and come back along the platform. Nobody had seen the whole of anybody else. "Charming," said Reeves dryly. Isabel spoke without looking at any of them. "My father liked it so." The words were not random. They came from a place in her deeper than grief. Adrian Broadhurst had ruled by separation, this person against that, this dependency hidden from that pride, each household truth kept in its own locked drawer. In the shock of his death, his system survived him. They sat together because the police required it. Inwardly, each still occupied a compartment of his arrangement. Poirot moved toward the small writing table under the mirror. Upon it lay a railway guide, a folded evening paper, and a silver ashtray containing one match burned only halfway down. Who was smoking? Fisk glanced about uncertainly. Broadhurst did not smoke cigarettes. Cigars only. Captain Anstruther? Not tonight. Nor I, said Clara. Mrs. Broadhurst gave a little laugh that floated and did not land. Must we now account for a match? When it has been struck and not used, yes. She gave him a level look. You have a genius for making trifles insolent, Monsieur Poirot. Not insolent, madam. Merely impatient to become important. Reeves requested the ladies' handbags and the gentlemen's pockets to be searched. No one protested openly, yet from the room rose that cold vibration of affront which decent people feel when their respectability is handled by authority. Fisk yielded banknotes, spectacles, 2 letters, and a gold pencil. Anstruther produced gloves, keys, and a photograph of Isabel which he colored slightly to see displayed. Clara had a notebook, a train schedule, a purse containing exact coins, and nothing else. Isabel carried a handkerchief, a compact, and a library ticket. Mrs. Broadhurst's bag offered a silver card case, a cut-glass scent bottle, and a sheaf of visiting cards bound by an elastic band. No blue envelope appeared. At the midpoint of that small humiliation, Poirot's eyes drifted to the platform beyond the glass. Through the narrow slit between curtain and frame he could still see, in the sealed carriage opposite, the black morocco valise, and the white label upon it leaned from the handle at its persistent wrong angle like some tiny, stubborn announcement that neat surfaces had been disturbed by a human hand not entirely master of itself. Reeves asked Clara for the details of Broadhurst's business. She supplied them with admirable lucidity, yet when he turned the talk to personal matters she became evasive by excess of exactness. Mr. Broadhurst was methodical, punctual, and generous in remuneration. And agreeable? A pause. He could be very charming. Could be? Mr. Broadhurst preferred efficiency. Again the truth, and again not all of it. Poirot, who believed that adverbs often confess what nouns conceal, stored away preferred. It was Isabel, unexpectedly, who broke the surface of propriety. You needn't speak as though he were a board meeting, Clara. He bullied people. He enjoyed making them wait and making them ask. He could be kind, but he liked gratitude more than kindness. Mrs. Broadhurst's glance flashed to her. Isabel. What? Must we pretend because he has just died? The violence of the question shook her more than anyone else. She put a hand to her forehead. For the first time tears came, not from filial sentiment, Poirot thought, but from the horror of having told the truth in public and found that truth irrevocable. Anstruther moved, then checked himself. It was Clara who crossed first, and placed a glass of water into Isabel's hand. The gesture was so simple that it might have passed unnoticed. Poirot did not miss the look Isabel gave her over the rim: gratitude, dependence, and a child's involuntary trust. Here, then, was one of the emotional lines in the room, quiet and perhaps more significant than the declared engagement. A constable entered with a message for Reeves. Scotland Yard had been informed. A surgeon was coming. The carriage would remain where it stood. No one was to be released. Until when? Asked Fisk. Until we know more. The answer, though inevitable, darkened the room. Detention changes manners more efficiently than accusation. Mrs. Broadhurst ceased attempting lightness. Anstruther's face grew harder. Isabel sat down at last, not from weakness but because standing had become an admission of nerves. Poirot watched them settle into discomfort and knew that pressure, once begun, has its own morality. It strips off the ornamental and leaves the necessary. Section 3 has ended. The stripping process had already begun when the surgeon came in with his black bag and apologetic professional gravity. Reeves took him out again almost at once, together with Poirot, to the sealed carriage. The others were left behind the waiting-room door with a constable and their own thoughts, which were by now the less merciful guard. The platform had grown quieter. Railway business, having been shoved to the farther lines, now went on at a distance. The lamps made clear circles on the concrete and left long bars of shadow between the coaches. Reeves unlocked the saloon and stood back for the surgeon. The examination, insofar as laymen can ever interpret it, was brief and conclusive only in one respect. Adrian Broadhurst had not died of any natural seizure. The means by which he had been killed was simple enough. The surgeon would not commit himself more precisely until later. Death, he said, could not have been very long delayed after the fatal attack. "And within what time?" asked Reeves. "Certainly after Captain Anstruther's visit, if that gentleman indeed saw him alive. But not long after. Minutes rather than half an hour." Reeves nodded as if the answer pleased him by narrowing possibilities. Poirot was less satisfied. Minutes are elastic things in a station. They stretch for the anxious and vanish for the self-absorbed. He moved slowly about the compartment. Adrian Broadhurst's face, freed now from immediate attention, had acquired the chill impersonality of the dead. Powerful men often become after death curiously smaller, as though authority had depended upon warmth. On the small folding table lay a timetable, a fountain pen, and the silver case which Captain Anstruther had mentioned. The case was shut but not latched. Within it were memoranda, a bundle of typed sheets, and several business letters. No blue envelope. "So the private packet is missing," said Reeves. "Perhaps Mr. Broadhurst had it in his pocket." They searched. It was not there. Poirot's eyes traveled to the farther door again. It opened not on the main platform but onto the narrow service side where parcels were loaded and attendants passed. The mat before it still showed the little fold. Beside the threshold, almost invisible unless the light struck it, was a smear of something pale. Powder? Dust? He bent nearer. It was not enough to identify, but enough to prove contact. "Hobbs said he was shifting mailbags," murmured Poirot. Reeves looked at him. "You think someone left by that side?" "I think someone had the possibility. It is not yet the same thing." They called the porter again. Hobbs came unwillingly, casting large reproachful glances at the dead carriage as if resenting the way murder untidies a station. He confirmed that the service side had not been watched continuously. A woman, he added after much pressure, had gone that way some minutes before the discovery. He had thought she belonged to the hotel staff because he saw only a pale coat and a small hat. Had she been Miss Broadhurst? He would not swear it. Had she been Mrs. Broadhurst? He would not swear that either. He would, however, swear that Captain Anstruther came back by the proper platform side. "That narrows the field to almost every lady in England," said Reeves. "And half the hotel," said Hobbs gloomily. When he had gone, Poirot asked for Mrs. Broadhurst's traveling coat. It was fetched from the waiting-room under protest. The garment was dove-colored and exquisitely cut. Isabel's own coat, brought for comparison, was grayer, plainer, and much shorter. Hobbs, peering and apologizing, became no wiser than before. "But one of them would have brushed the mailbags," said Reeves. "There ought to be a mark." "There is perhaps a mark," said Poirot. "The question is whether it was made then." He held the two coats to the light. Isabel's hem showed station dust. Mrs. Broadhurst's, surprisingly, did not. Yet the absence itself was a kind of statement. A platform is generous with dirt. A spotless hem at such an hour may speak as loudly as a stained one. Across the compartment the black morocco valise remained under the rack, patient and sinister in its silence. The label on its green string had not righted itself. It still listed as though some small private collapse had occurred there, ignored by everyone except the one mind in the station to which asymmetry was a language. Poirot asked that Clara Dean be sent to him next. She came with controlled steps and stood just within the doorway, taking in the dead man, the open dispatch case, the two coats, and Poirot's expression in one swift practiced glance. "You knew of the blue envelope," he said. "Yes." "You knew more than you said?" A faint color rose under her skin. "I knew only that Mr. Broadhurst kept it separate, and that Mrs. Broadhurst once asked me whether he still carried it." Reeves turned sharply. "When?" "About a week ago." "For what reason?" "I did not ask." "Again English reticence," murmured Poirot. Clara's mouth tightened. "It was not reticence. It was prudence. Mr. Broadhurst disliked questions." "And were you prudent tonight?" She looked from him to the dead man. Something long compressed moved in her face. Fatigue, distaste, perhaps pity for herself and others whose lives had been conducted to this platform by another's will. "No," she said. "Tonight no one was prudent." The answer, though obscure, had emotional honesty. Poirot stored it away beside the others. Clara knew more of the currents beneath the household surface than she meant to disclose. Yet she was not lying for her own advantage. She was protecting somebody. Whether wisely remained to be seen. Reeves sent her back and ordered tea for everyone, which is the British substitute for moral certainty. As the cups came and the station clocks pushed forward, a new hardness entered the night. The early shock had worn off. In its place there was strain, hunger, and the beginning of calculation. People can endure tragedy while it remains theatrical. It is when it becomes administrative that they betray themselves. Section 4 has ended. Calculation showed itself first in Mr. Julian Fisk. He set down his teacup with fingers that had begun to shake and asked Reeves, in the tone of a man claiming a right while pretending merely to seek guidance, whether his legal responsibilities to the estate required him to know what had been found in Broadhurst's pockets. "Later," said Reeves. "But there may be documents." "There are indeed documents," said Poirot, "and one of them is absent." Fisk stared at him. "You refer to this mysterious blue envelope?" "I know nothing about it." "No?" "No." Yet the denial came with the queer emphasis of a man not rebutting fact but warding off association. Poirot asked if he would step with him into the corridor outside. Reeves agreed. On the platform side of the door, where the gas brackets threw a kinder light, Fisk's pink, respectable face seemed all at once to have sagged at the edges. "You are in difficulties, monsieur?" said Poirot. Fisk attempted indignation and produced only weariness. "Who is not, if one lives long enough with a man like Adrian Broadhurst?" "Ah. Then there were difficulties." "Financial ones." "Temporary." Quite recoverable. Known to Mr. Broadhurst? Fisk gave a little laugh that had no spirit in it. Broadhurst knew everything worth using. The truth came out in pieces. As trustee of a small family settlement, Fisk had used money unwisely, intending to replace it. Broadhurst had discovered the deficiency months earlier and had since held it over him, not openly, never vulgarly, but with that exquisite pressure by which the powerful keep other men bending without appearing to touch them. "So you had motive," said Poirot. "My dear sir, everyone in that room had motive. Broadhurst collected motive as some men collect miniatures." That, too, was true. Fisk went on, more bitterly because shame had loosened him. Broadhurst opposed Hugh Anstruther because poverty offended him. He kept Clara Dean in a condition of permanent usefulness. He had made Isabel adore and fear him in equal measure. As for Evelyn, Fisk stopped. "Yes?" said Poirot. "Evelyn married him knowing what he was. I used to think that settled the matter. Lately I have not been so sure." He would say no more. It was enough. Even reluctance, if it has direction, is information. When they returned, Captain Anstruther was being questioned again about his own affairs. Debt, it emerged, had played its expected role. There had been losses at cards 2 years before. He had paid most, not all. Broadhurst had learned of them. Isabel listened without turning her head. Nothing wounds love so quickly as the discovery that outsiders have long known what has been kept from it. "I would have told her," said Hugh. "When?" asked Reeves. He answered honestly. "Soon." Mrs. Broadhurst gave one soft, contemptuous breath that might have been a laugh. "Men always mean to tell the truth soon." "And women?" said Poirot. "We tell it when it becomes useful." The candor startled the room. She herself seemed almost amused by it, though beneath the amusement there was fatigue, and under the fatigue something more dangerous, the sensation of a person who has for years maintained a difficult pose and is beginning to find the muscles fail. Isabel turned sharply. "That is a hateful thing to say." "My dear child, most true things are hateful for a moment." The exchange revealed more than either intended. Poirot saw in it not mere dislike but an intimacy strained beyond its habit. Evelyn had always spoken to Isabel as one speaks to an adored junior equal, never quite motherly, never merely decorative. Now the bond tugged and frayed under strain. On the magazine table lay the latest illustrated review. As Anstruther moved, it slid aside, disclosing beneath it a railway cloakroom token. Reeves picked it up. "Whose is this?" No one answered at once. Then Clara said, "It may be mine. Mr. Broadhurst asked me to leave a parcel earlier." "What parcel?" "A hat-box belonging to Mrs. Broadhurst." Evelyn looked across quickly. "I had forgotten it entirely." Poirot noted the word. Forgotten entirely. It was too complete. People forget partially, defensively, or with explanation. Entire forgetfulness is often manufactured after the event. Through the waiting-room window, seen beyond 2 reflected faces and the station lamp, the black morocco valise in the sealed saloon remained fixed like a dark punctuation mark at the end of the evening, and its slanting label seemed now less an accident than a tiny private mockery of all Broadhurst's passion for arrangement. Reeves sent a constable to fetch the hat-box from the cloakroom. While they waited, Poirot asked Isabel quietly whether her father had seemed agitated before he called Hugh to the carriage. "He was in one of his calm moods," she said. Which is worse? When he raised his voice, one could answer him. When he was calm, he had decided something. And what had he decided tonight? She hesitated. That Hugh and I were to be parted. Only that? She looked at him fully then, and there passed over her face the shadow of an older fear. He said there were facts about the past which would alter my opinion of many people. He enjoyed beginning sentences like that. Did he say whose past? No. The cloakroom parcel arrived. It was indeed a hatbox, with tissue, ribbons, and nothing more. Mrs. Broadhurst barely glanced at it. Reeves apologized without conviction. Yet the interruption had done its work. Another possible path had opened and closed. Frustration spread through the room like a draft. Then the station clock struck the quarter, and with that commonplace chime there came a fresh message from outside. Scotland Yard's divisional superintendent had authorized Poirot, if he pleased, to continue the inquiry jointly with Reeves. The room received the news differently. Fisk brightened. Hugh stiffened. Clara became stiller. Evelyn smiled as if at some social arrangement successfully managed. Then, said Poirot, we continue. And perhaps, since the train is no longer leaving, some of us will discover that patience is not so impossible a virtue as we had imagined. No one answered him. But several looked, involuntarily, at Mrs. Broadhurst. Section 5 has ended. Mrs. Broadhurst's smile faded only after the others had looked away from her, and it was in that tiny delay that Poirot saw how much of her self-command was performance for an audience. When attention left her, fatigue descended visibly, not softening but thinning her. She seemed, for a second, a woman who had been holding up a painted screen and no longer found it light. Poirot asked if Miss Broadhurst and Miss Dean would walk with him as far as the bookstall passage. Reeves consented and followed at a tactful distance. The station beyond the private room had altered character. Public traffic was nearly gone, shutters were half down, the bright vulgarity of advertisements had taken on the loneliness of things left behind. Somewhere a boy stacked unsold newspapers with melancholy claps. "This is where Hobbs last saw your father before the valise was taken in," Poirot said. Isabel nodded. He had been at the telegraph desk. For whom was the telegram? I don't know. Clara answered instead. Mr. Broadhurst sent one message after dinner to Lord Leconbury's secretary. Isabel stopped walking. Why to Lord Leconbury? Clara regretted speaking at once. I assumed it concerned business. No, said Isabel. It concerned me. The words were low, but full of the terrible certainty by which the young sometimes perceive their elders' designs before the design itself is stated. Poirot saw her mind moving backward, fitting together the previous weeks, invitations she had refused, compliments too deliberate, her father's late civility toward an elderly nobleman whom she disliked on sight. She stood very straight under the station lamp and looked suddenly less like a dutiful daughter than like a prisoner who has at last seen the architectural plan of the prison. He meant to marry you elsewhere, said Poirot. Yes. And Mrs. Broadhurst knew. Isabel hesitated. I think she feared it. Feared it, not wanted it. Another small distinction. They reached the telegraph desk. The clerk, consulted, confirmed that Broadhurst had sent a short, urgent message shortly before his death. The text, recorded in the duplicate book, was bland enough, regret delay, further discussion unavoidable, but its destination was indeed Leconbury House. Isabel gave a little hard laugh. There, then. He had decided. Clara looked at her with real distress. Miss Broadhurst, I am sorry. It was the first spontaneous sentence Poirot had heard from her that evening. The plain, capable secretary had until now spoken in forms. This simple sorrow altered her face more than beauty could have done. He saw then with certainty what he had half suspected. Clara Dean's loyalty to Isabel was not professional. It had the quiet absoluteness of affection that asks no return and therefore receives very little mercy from life. Miss Dean, said Poirot, you served Mrs. Broadhurst as well as Mr. Broadhurst? In household matters occasionally. Did you leave any parcel for her other than the hat-box? No. Not a packet of letters? Clara's eyes met his, and for a moment the whole station seemed to grow still around that silent exchange. No, she said. The answer was a lie, yet not a self-protecting one. It was the lie of someone holding shut a door behind which another person's humiliation waits crouching. On the counter lay the telegraph forms, the stamps, the string, each item square to the edge of the wood. Beside them the clerk had set a pair of scissors very exactly. Poirot's glance moved on. In matters of disorder one notices most clearly the places where order has been over-insisted upon. When they returned by the platform side, the saloon carriage stood alone now except for a constable, and the patient black shape of the Broadhurst valise under the rack. The cream label, visible through the glass, hung still at its perverse angle, and Poirot suddenly saw not the label itself but the fingers that had tied it, fingers usually accurate, tonight perhaps made uncertain by haste or emotion. Back in the waiting room, Reeves had drawn Captain Anstruther to one side. The young man came out of the conversation looking as though he had accepted some ugly necessity. He asked Isabel quietly whether she wished him to withdraw until the inquiry ended. No, she said. He bowed slightly. Then I stay. It was not a lover's speech but a soldier's, and because it was so undramatic it touched her more than any protestation could have done. Her hand moved toward him and stopped. In that checked motion there lay the whole tragedy of decent people under suspicion. They long to comfort and are prevented by propriety, pride, or fear of making things worse. Mrs. Broadhurst, watching them, gave a curious expression almost maternal and almost desolate. Then she asked Clara, too casually, whether the hotel corridor on the parcels side communicated directly with the ladies' retiring room. Yes, said Clara. By the service passage. Reeves looked up. Why do you ask? Evelyn seemed faintly surprised at herself. Do I? I suppose because one's thoughts run on exits when one is trapped. The remark went deeper than she intended. Fisk shifted uneasily. Hugh stared at the carpet. Poirot, however, marked the involuntary confession of imagination. The innocent seek explanations. The guilty study routes. A constable entered with another piece of information. No telegram case had been found upon the dead man or in the carriage. It had vanished as completely as the blue envelope. Reeves swore softly. Two missing objects were now threading themselves through the affair like dark cords. Whether they belonged to one hand or two remained uncertain. Poirot folded his hands and watched the room absorb this second absence. It did what second shocks always do. It did not merely add to fear, it reorganized it. Everyone who had been concentrating upon the murder must now remember the moments before and after with a new violence. And memory, under compulsion, becomes less truthful and more revealing. Section 6 has ended. Memory, once compelled, yielded not facts but fragments, and Poirot set about collecting them with the patience of a man who knows that fragments, if rightly arranged, may become more truthful than declarations. He asked Mrs. Broadhurst if she would speak with him alone for a few minutes in the ladies' retiring room, the door being left open and a constable within call. She assented with the languor of one too tired to object, and too proud to collapse. The room beyond was overbright and impersonal, with gilt taps, a mirror too flattering, and an odor of powder, steam, and railway upholstery. Evelyn removed her hat and sat before the dressing-table without looking at her reflection. Women do that only when they already know what the face will say. "You wish to ask me about the blue envelope," she said. "I wish to ask you why it frightened you." She gave a small movement of the shoulders. "Must one be frightened only by murder?" "No. Often one is more frightened by what murder interrupts." That reached her. He saw it in the tightening of the mouth, the tiny downward turn of the eyes. For the first time since the beginning, no audience stood between her and her own fatigue. "Adrian kept old letters," she said at last. "He kept everything. Receipts, invitations, grievances, sentimental rubbish. He believed the past should remain indexed in case it became useful." "Useful to whom?" "To him." "And were these letters yours?" There was a long silence. Then she said, "No. Not precisely." It was a curious answer, and a revealing one. Letters may belong to the writer, the recipient, or the subject. Only a person living in moral ambiguity chooses a word like precisely. Poirot asked whether Broadhurst had quarreled with Isabel that evening. Evelyn's face changed. It did not soften, it became real. "He intended to force her hand," she said. "He had persuaded himself that Lord Leconbury was a suitable match. He always imagined money conferred virtue on those who already possessed it. Hugh offended him because Hugh needed things." "And you?" "I married Adrian because I needed things." The candor, uttered without self-pity, was worth more than any denial. Poirot waited. "I was poor, admired, and tired of being careful," she went on. "He offered security with elegance. People think that bargain vulgar only when they are not required to make it." "And afterwards?" "Afterwards one pays in smaller coins for a very long time." There it was, the emotional truth, spare and final. Whatever else Evelyn Broadhurst concealed, she concealed it now not to defend vanity, but to maintain some broken internal structure by which she had lived. Poirot almost pitied her. Almost. On the little counter beneath the mirror stood a tray of brushes and combs set by the attendant in perfect parallel. One brush lay half an inch out of line, and beside it, reflected in the open door and the station light beyond, the black morocco valise in the distant carriage showed for an instant through the glass partition, its hanging label likewise askew, as though the whole night had become a page on which one recurring error insisted upon being read. "Did Adrian threaten to show Isabel the letters?" Poirot asked. Evelyn turned. "Who told you that?" "Your face." For the first time, she looked frightened in the simple human sense, not merely strained. "He may have hinted. Adrian did not often state his cruelties plainly. He preferred them to arrive in the imagination first." "Did you enter the carriage after Captain Anstruther left it?" "No." The denial came with speed and force, too much of each. Poirot rose. He had obtained what he needed, not a confession but pressure. One does not pick a lock by shouting at it. One applies a repeated and exact force. When they rejoined the others, Reeves had been speaking to the station matron. A powder mark, faint but visible, had been found on the service side rail of the saloon door. The matron, embarrassed, said that several ladies used a face powder of similar tint. Mrs. Broadhurst was among them. So, unfortunately, was that of many other women in London. Reeves muttered that evidence had a genius for becoming social. Poirot merely asked whether Mrs. Broadhurst had repowdered her face that evening. She said yes, in the waiting room, before the body was found. That also might be true. Yet truth offered too conveniently is seldom the whole architectural plan. Mr. Fiske, waiting his turn by the fire, now addressed Poirot with a reckless air. "If old letters are in question, I may perhaps assist. Adrian's first wife wrote incessantly." The room changed at once. Isabel's head came up. Clara went still. Evelyn did not move at all. "My mother?" said Isabel. Fiske colored. He had not meant to be so direct and knew it. "I only mean there were old family papers." "What papers?" "Nothing of importance." "That is for me to judge," said Isabel. "There are, in certain households, names which function like closed rooms. Everyone knows them, no one enters. The dead first Mrs. Broadhurst had plainly been one of those rooms." Isabel, whose affection for Evelyn had perhaps depended partly upon that sealed door remaining shut, now felt the air move under it. Poirot asked quietly, "Did your father speak often of your mother?" "Never," said Isabel. "And Mrs. Broadhurst?" A strange expression crossed the girl's face. "She never spoke of her either. That is one reason I trusted her." The statement, innocent in intention, struck Evelyn like a physical blow. She looked down at once, but not before Poirot had seen the naked pain in her eyes. Here was motive sharpened by irony, to be loved for the very silence that conceals one's guilt. Such arrangements do not endure pressure. Reeves announced that no one would sleep. Statements would be taken again, and the station hotel sitting room had been placed at their disposal. They must move there at once. The company rose together, weary, affronted, and more afraid than before, and their movement toward the corridor had in it the mechanical obedience of passengers changing trains in darkness, not knowing that the destination had altered while they waited. Section 7 has ended. The corridor to the station hotel formed a bright artery between two darker worlds, and the little procession moved along it under the supervision of Reeves and his constables with the subdued indignation of respectable persons being marched somewhere without proper social explanation. The hotel sitting room assigned to them was on the first floor above the booking hall. Its windows looked down upon platform 9, so that even here the stalled saloon carriage remained within sight, a black interruption beneath the lamps. A fire had been lit. Sandwiches and coffee stood untouched on a side table. Exhaustion is selective, it abolishes appetite more readily than vanity, and several of the party took more care arranging themselves in chairs than they had taken with the food. Poirot remained standing. "Before we separate for statements," he said, "I should like to try a small experiment. Mr. Broadhurst's missing blue envelope has, I think, already passed through another hand. Perhaps even through two. I shall ask each of you only one question. When did you last see Mr. Broadhurst open that envelope?" The responses came in order. Fiske, never. Hugh, never. Isabel, never. Evelyn, never. Clara, once 3 months ago, when he checked its contents and locked it away again. "Locked it where?" asked Reeves sharply. "In the valise." "So you did handle it?" "No. I only saw." It was almost enough to make her blush. Clara Dean, so exact in daily service, had betrayed herself by precision once again. She could not bear looseness even in deception. Poirot nodded as if satisfied and asked for the station hotel chambermaid who had attended the ladies' retiring room earlier. She came, terrified and grateful to have something definite to say. Yes, one of the ladies had come through hurriedly after the disturbance on the platform. No, she could not identify her positively, because the veil was down. Yes, the lady had paused at the mirror and taken something from her muff or bag. No, it had not been powder. It had been papers perhaps, or a case. Yes, there had been another person in the adjoining dressing cubicle at the time. "Who?" said Reeves. The maid looked helplessly at the assembled women. "I could not see, sir. Only hear a rustle. Then a little click, as of a handbag." If a dropped pin had actually fallen, it might at last have justified the cliché. Clara's face lost color. Poirot saw it, and altered nothing in his expression. "Thank you," he said to the maid. "You may go." Reeves turned at once to Clara. "You were in that room?" She drew a breath. "Yes." "Why did you not say so before?" "Because I found nothing relevant." "Indeed?" With a movement that seemed to age her, she opened the leather portfolio she still carried and drew out a slim morocco-covered telegram case. "I found this under the chair after Mrs. Broadhurst had gone. I intended to give it back privately." Then the inquiry widened. Reeves seized it. It was Adrian Broadhurst's. Empty. The effect was immediate. Suspicion, which had until now circled broadly, dropped upon Clara with almost vulgar relief. Fisk stared. Hugh frowned. Isabel uttered a low incredulous protest. Evelyn sat quite still, only her hands clasping one another too tightly in her lap. "You concealed this from the police?" said Reeves. "Yes." "Why?" Clara looked not at him but at Isabel. "Because I thought it might contain something painful for the family. Or incriminating for yourself." A flush rose and vanished. "No." The room wanted to believe the worse. It is one of society's less noble economies that once a modest person is found with a concealed object, everyone feels paradoxically reassured. Evil has chosen its proper wardrobe. Outside the hotel window, down on the dim platform, the saloon carriage still waited with the black morocco valise inside it, and the label on the handle, faint even at that distance, seemed to Poirot like the stubborn reminder that the essential untidiness of the affair had occurred not in Clara's conscientious hands but elsewhere and under far greater emotional strain. He asked to inspect the telegram case. Inside, though empty, there remained in the silk lining a tiny scrape where a paper clip had been dragged hastily across it. Not one paper, then, but several, had been removed at once. Reeves muttered something about arresting Clara for withholding evidence. Poirot shook his head. "Not yet. She concealed. That is certain. But concealment and murder are not identical twins." Isabel rose abruptly. "Clara could not have killed my father." "Why not?" asked Reeves. "Because she hated scenes." It was a foolish answer and a profound one. Clara did indeed hate scenes. One saw it in every disciplined line of her. That she should nevertheless have withheld the case suggested a powerful motive of protection, not attack. Poirot turned to Evelyn. "Madam, did you request Miss Dean to return the case to you privately?" "No." "Did you know she had found it?" "No." Again the speed, again the effort. Yet this time another thing accompanied it, not fear for herself, but fear of what Clara might say next. Clara, seeing that fear, made her choice. "Mrs. Broadhurst knew nothing," she said. "I acted alone." Too loyal, thought Poirot. Much too loyal for truth. Reeves, impatient and practical, ordered Clara kept under separate observation in the adjoining room. Isabel protested and was silenced. Clara went without resistance, and as she passed Evelyn she gave her a look that nobody but Poirot fully understood. It was not the look of an accomplice, nor of a dependent, but of a woman who has decided to endure another's disgrace if by doing so she can postpone a catastrophe for someone she loves more than herself. The door closed behind her. In the silence that followed, the fire settled with a sigh. Poirot turned toward the window where the platform lamps burned below like questions set out in a row and not yet answered. Section 8 has ended. The questions below were not answered, and Poirot, after a brief exchange with Reeves, crossed to the adjoining room where Clara Dean sat under the eye of a constable who looked deeply uncomfortable at being employed as custodian of a lady. He withdrew at once when requested. Clara remained upright in the straight-backed chair, her portfolio on her knees, as though posture itself were the last possession she could defend. "You wish me to accuse Mrs. Broadhurst?" she said. "No. I wish you to cease saving her badly." The directness of it broke through her control. She lowered her eyes. "I am not saving her." "Then you are sacrificing yourself foolishly. It is not the same thing, though it resembles it in poor light." For a moment she almost smiled. Then she said, "If I speak, I injure Miss Broadhurst." "Perhaps. But silence may injure her more." That argument reached the deepest part of her. Clara gave way not because she feared the police, nor because she desired justice in the abstract, but because Isabel's welfare had become the standard by which every other value was being measured. "I was in the dressing cubicle," she said quietly. "I heard Mrs. Broadhurst enter in haste. She was breathing hard. I saw her reflection in the mirror through the side panel. She took papers from her muff and put them into the telegram case. Then she seemed to think better of it, removed them again, and hid the empty case under the chair. When she had gone, I found it." "Why did you say nothing?" "Because I knew what the papers must concern." "The first Mrs. Broadhurst?" "Yes." There it was at last. Poirot waited, and Clara, who had spent years arranging other people's correspondence without being asked for a soul, now opened hers in exhausted sequence. The dead first wife, and Broadhurst, had been Evelyn's intimate friend before the second marriage. There had been letters, old, anguished, humiliating letters, written by and after she discovered that Adrian and Evelyn were lovers, and had later taken her own life, and the household had since observed a silence so perfect that Isabel, a child at the time, retained only an image of grief without structure. Adrian had preserved the letters because they gave him permanent power over Evelyn. If he chose, he could show them to Isabel and destroy at once the daughter's memory of her mother, her trust in her stepmother, and Evelyn's carefully sustained place in the house. "And tonight?" asked Poirot. Tonight he meant to use them. Mrs. Broadhurst asked me this week whether he still carried the packet. I understood then. Understood what? That he had threatened her with it. And because of Miss Broadhurst's engagement, I feared he would act. This, then, was the hidden engine, not greed, not even jealousy, but the past preserved as instrument, and brought out on a night when a daughter was to be bartered into a prudent marriage. It had the cold economy of Broadhurst's character. And the murder? Said Poirot. Clara raised her head. I did not see that. I only know Mrs. Broadhurst came through the service passage after Captain Anstruther had returned. She looked. She stopped. How? As if something had ended too suddenly, and she had not yet caught up with herself. Outside, through the hotel window, the dark carriage below kept its watch on them. The black morocco valise under the rack was no more than a shape from this height, yet the pale sliver of its hanging label could still be seen, oblique and faint, like a line in a letter written by a hand that trembled only once, and therefore gave itself away. Poirot thanked Clara and sent for Reeves. The inspector listened with satisfaction tempered by caution. It puts Broadhurst's wife on the path, certainly. But it does not place her in the act. No, said Poirot. For that we require the little exactitudes. He went back to the main sitting room. Isabel stood at the window, gazing down at the platform as though the answer might rise visibly from the carriage roof. He remained near enough to help if needed and far enough not to presume. In that measured distance there was more love than in embraces. Poirot told Isabel gently that certain letters concerning the early years of her father's marriage existed. He did not yet say more. She drew away from the window without surprise. I knew there was something, she said. One always knows when a house has been built over a buried room. Did you suspect Mrs. Broadhurst? She closed her eyes briefly. Never in a definite form. Only sometimes I thought she was kind to me with a kind of pain in it. The answer made the future, whatever it held, crueler. To lose a beloved illusion is sorrow enough. To learn that the illusion rested upon actual feeling is worse. Poirot felt again that chill moral complication which interested him more than crime itself. People do not sin in straight lines. They tangle love, vanity, cowardice, pity, and self-protection until the act that ends the matter seems both inevitable and monstrous. Reeves re-entered with fresh news from below. A constable searching the service passage had found, wedged behind a radiator, the white tape that had once tied a packet of letters. No letters. Only the tape. Burned, perhaps? Said Fisk. Or hidden elsewhere, said Poirot. Mrs. Broadhurst, very pale now, asked for water. Her voice remained composed, but the request itself was a confession of physical strain, and strain is the enemy of arrangement. The room, which had thus far held together by manners, was beginning to crack along the older lines of guilt. Section 9 has ended. The crack widened almost at once. Reeves, whose patience with delicacy had been exhausted by the discovery of the telegram case and the white tape, asked Mrs. Broadhurst directly whether she denied using the service passage after Captain Anstruther returned from the carriage. I deny nothing that can be proved, she said. It was a disastrous answer. Fisk gave an audible intake of breath. Hugh stared at her in honest bewilderment. Isabel did not move at all. Poirot intervened before Reeves could press too crudely. Madam, there are different uses of a passage. One may go to meet, to flee, to hide, or to retrieve. Which was yours? She looked at him with an exhausted hatred that was less for him than for the necessity of choosing words. To retrieve the letters? Yes. From the valise? Another pause, then. Yes. Reeves leaned forward. Before or after your husband was killed? She did not answer. Silence in such moments is more violent than protest. It flung the room into new alignment. Clara closed her eyes. Fisk sank back. Hugh took a step toward Isabel and stopped only because she had become, in the space of a breath, entirely unreachable. Poirot asked mildly, Madam, when you went to the carriage earlier and had your ticket clipped, was it then that you noticed the envelope in the valise? Her head jerked up. It was a small motion, but unmistakable. Ah, said Poirot. So, you did open the valise on that earlier visit. I wished only to see whether he had indeed brought the packet with him. And he had. Yes. This clarified one part of the affair. Mrs. Broadhurst had gone into the carriage early, ostensibly to arrange the rug. In truth, she had confirmed the presence of the letters. She had then returned to the waiting room and, after Hugh's interview with Broadhurst, used the unguarded service side to re-enter and take them. But whether she had also killed remained the final step. Poirot moved to the window. Down below, the saloon carriage lay under the lamps like an accusation preserved in enamel and brass. The black morocco valise was still just visible, and now that he allowed himself to see it whole, he saw not merely the slanting label but the knot itself. Wrong for Adrian Broadhurst, wrong for Clara Dean, wrong for any habitual railway hand. It was a knot tied by elegance, not utility, neat, quick, and unfamiliar with luggage. He turned back. Madam, who retied the label? A flicker passed across her face. Reeves exclaimed, The label! Yes, my friend. Mr. Broadhurst was a man of order. His labels, according to Hobbes, were always attached square and flat. He even complained once when one twisted. Miss Dean, who packs for him, ties a porter's knot. Hobbes himself ties another. But this one was untied and retied by someone who needed the valise opened in haste and then closed to appear untouched. A lady's knot, if you like, charming, insufficient, and just a little wrong. Evelyn's hand went to her throat. Still Poirot did not strike. Yet one thing remains. To steal letters is not to kill. It is ugly, yes, but not identical. He asked Reeves for leave to see the compartment once more. They all went down together, because by now no one could bear to remain behind when revelation was near. The platform seemed colder than before. Dawn had not yet come, but the lamps were losing authority. Inside the saloon, Poirot bent over the mat by the service side door. He pointed out, to Reeves and to no one else at first, the faint crescent indentation near the fold. A narrow heel. Not Miss Broadhurst's. Not Miss Dean's sensible shoe. Mrs. Broadhurst's, perhaps. But we must not be vulgar, we need more. He lifted the rug carefully. Trapped beneath its edge lay 1 minute pearl gray thread. Evelyn closed her eyes. The rest felt it before they understood it. A physical object, however small, has a brutality no psychological deduction can equal. Hugh looked from the thread to Evelyn and back again, stunned less by the implication than by the collapse of appearances. Fisk muttered a broken phrase about God. Clara stood like stone. Isabel alone remained without outward motion. Her suffering had gone past display into that terrible stillness which is almost dignity. Poirot straightened. Now I think we have enough. Not for the law alone, it already has much, but for the truth, which is more exacting. Let us return upstairs. There shall be, as in all these sad affairs, the final conversation. The phrase sounded civilized. That was its cruelty. Murder in the modern world ends not with swords or storms, but with chairs drawn into a circle and people compelled to listen while their lives are interpreted. They went back up, no longer merely detained passengers but participants in a moral reckoning from which none would emerge with all disguises intact. Section 10 has ended. The final conversation began before everyone had properly sat down. Poirot remained standing before the hearth. Reeves took the side table. The others disposed themselves in a tense half-circle whose arrangement was accidental only on the surface. Isabel sat furthest from Evelyn. Clara placed herself where she might, if needed, reach Isabel and not be noticed doing so. Hugh stood behind Isabel's chair, no longer attempting distance. Fisk lowered himself into the deepest seat as though bracing for a medical verdict. Poirot folded his hands. "Let us proceed by steps," he said. "A staircase is useful in these matters. One climbs, and at each landing one sees a little more clearly. At the first step, we established that Captain Anstruther did not kill Mr. Broadhurst. He quarreled with him. That gave us noise, anger, and an admirable false solution. But he left by the main platform and passed nobody returning. Also, when he came out, Mr. Broadhurst was occupied with papers in the valise. Therefore the crime came after." Hugh let out a breath he had not known he still held. Isabel did not look at him. "At the second step, we see that Miss Dean did not kill Mr. Broadhurst. She concealed the telegram case, yes. She lied, yes. But hers was a lie of protection after the event. She found the empty case in the lady's room because another person had already removed the papers from it. Miss Dean is guilty only of loyalty carried too far." Clara bowed her head once, accepting even that gentle blame. "At the third step, Mr. Fisk also is removed. He had motive, financial motive, shabby and familiar. But his guilt is of a drawing-room sort. It trembles, apologizes, and writes memoranda to itself. It is not the guilt that steps through a service passage and leaves a thread under a rug." Fisk made an indistinct noise of relief and shame. "At the fourth step, we approach the letters. These letters were written long ago by the first Mrs. Broadhurst after she discovered that her husband and her friend, Mrs. Evelyn Broadhurst that is now, were lovers. Later she died by her own hand. Mr. Broadhurst kept those letters, not because they interested his heart, which was small, but because they preserved power. He meant to use them. Perhaps he would have used them to break Miss Broadhurst's engagement. Perhaps to force her toward Lord Leconbury. Certainly he intended pain. On that point there is, I think, no doubt." Nobody contradicted him. The fire gave a little snap. Outside the hotel windows the first eluded suggestion of dawn had begun to soften the lamps above platform 9. "At the fifth step," Poirot continued, "we see that Mrs. Broadhurst knew the letters were in the valise. Earlier in the evening she entered the carriage and had her ticket clipped. She did not go merely to arrange a rug. She opened the valise and confirmed that the packet was there. Later, after Captain Anstruther had left, she went by the service passage back into the carriage. She took the letters and the telegram case. She emerged through the ladies' retiring room. Miss Dean saw enough to understand and, from pity for Miss Broadhurst, remained silent. Evelyn sat rigidly upright, her face white and beautiful and defenseless at last. Only her eyes moved, and they moved not toward Poirot but toward Isabel. "At the sixth step," said Poirot, and now his voice grew quieter, "we arrive at the question that matters. Did Mrs. Broadhurst only steal the letters? Or did she kill?" He turned toward the window. Down on the platform the saloon carriage could still be seen, and in it, under the rack, the black morocco valise remained where it had been placed hours before. Its pale luggage label still hung crooked, but now its meaning had altered entirely. It was no longer merely a sign that somebody had opened the bag. It was the visible shape of a life gone wrong long before tonight. One elegant error pulled slightly awry and left at last where all could see it. "Mr. Broadhurst loved order," said Poirot. "He imposed it upon timetables, servants, finances, emotions, the very memories of his household. But there is an order so tyrannical that it breeds only secret disorder. In the carriage, after Captain Anstruther left, Mrs. Broadhurst entered by the service side to recover the packet. Mr. Broadhurst surprised her there, or perhaps had expected her. Men like him often enjoy the exact instant when another is trapped. There was a struggle, not long, not theatrical. The rug shifted. Her heel caught the mat. A thread from her glove remained beneath the edge. Afterwards, shaken beyond her usual precision, she retied the label wrongly, took the letters, and fled by the same side. That is why the porter saw the last passenger of platform 9 only indistinctly. It was not a passenger for the journey at all, but a wife escaping the scene of a murder. "No," said Evelyn. It was hardly more than breath. Then she lifted her head. "No. Not escaping. Finishing." The word broke whatever remained of her self-command. She rose, steadied herself on the chair, and looked directly at Isabel. "He told me he would show you the letters. He said you had been sentimental too long and that this would cure you of romantic nonsense. He said your mother had been weak and I had been vain, and that between us we had made you unfit for reality. And he was right about one thing: I had been vain. I married him because I wanted ease and admiration and not to be frightened of bills anymore. I told myself afterwards that kindness to you could repair something. It could not. Nothing could. But I would not let him destroy your mother and me together in your eyes. Not like that. Not as an evening's instruction." Isabel's face had lost all color. "You killed him!" Evelyn's mouth trembled once. "He laughed at me. I think I put out my hand to stop his mouth. There was a struggle. I do not know exactly how it happened. Only that suddenly he was looking at me as if I had committed some dreadful breach of manners, and then he was dead." That last touch, grotesque and accurate, made the truth complete. Adrian Broadhurst had governed life by social forms. He had died astonished that anyone should violate them before his face. Reeves moved slightly, but Poirot stopped him with a glance. There are admissions which the law can take in its own time. For a moment something more important than procedure occupied the room. Poirot looked at Isabel. "Mademoiselle, one cannot restore the dead first Mrs. Broadhurst, nor excuse the living second one. She betrayed, she lied, and tonight she killed. But remember this also: your father cultivated dependence, fear, and silence until at last he stood at the center of a system of his own making and was struck down by the very weakness he had preserved for use. That is the moral, if you ask one. Human beings are not ledgers. When we keep old sins as instruments, we do not control them. We feed them. No one spoke. Dawn widened slowly at the windows. On the platform below, a porter at last entered the saloon and lifted the black valise. The crooked label swung once, briefly catching the new light, and then disappeared from sight. Poirot drew himself up, sorrowful and composed. "It is always a misfortune," he said, "when love comes too late to be innocent, and too violently to remain love." Section 11 has ended. The end.